Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Concluded, the series where I take a look at some of my top 10 worst and best aspects from the series, being top 10 and worst album covers, songs and albums, and today we're gonna do the final installment of this mini-series in which we'll look at my top 10 favorite and what I would call best albums that I've reviewed this year. Now, before we go anywhere, firstly I want to apologize for all of you. You've been waiting for like 3 days for this video to get made, and yeah, I have been swamped with college work and work in general, and it hasn't been easy. I'm very tired, but I'm gonna soldier on and make this one. And secondly, stay tuned for the end of the video because I will be talking about what's gonna happen in the future of this channel then. So even if you're not interested in the list, you might want to go ahead and skip right to the end of this one just to hear what I have to say. But with that being said, let's get right into the 10th spot. So coming in at number 10 we have Matkamiel and Yermin by the band Saima from 2015. So this band on the 10th spot of this list actually doesn't even have a Prog archives page. Again, I've said this multiple times now, they have been quite elusive when it comes to whether they are actually progressive rock or not, but in my personal opinion they are well worthy for this title and someone should really get going on adding them to the archives. And well, they've really managed to captivate my heart. And if you don't know who these guys are, Saima are a Finnish band, or maybe even a musical group, because they consist not of only a few players, but instead they consist more around about, let's say, 30 players playing all various instruments that you can imagine, and all of them played masterfully. And this debut album by theirs that came out in 2015 is just so awfully unique. A lot of people would refer to this one as being very world music-like, but I have to say that the progressive aspect of this is just incontrovertibly existing on here, and that's why I might call this type of album progressive world music, and honestly I see nothing wrong with this. The music on here is really freaking cool. I think that everything that ties it up together does have to be progressive rock or the mentality of doing things progressively, but the fact of the matter is you hear music that sounds like it comes directly from different regions of the earth, from North America to Europe to Africa to South America to whatnot, and in addition to that there's also a little thing of like playing with time in the music and in the means of incorporating music that sounds like it was made in the past and music that sounds very futuristic, and of course music that is, you know, traditional modern. And yeah, it's a pretty cool mishmash put in together into this one long album. And when it comes to the downsides of this one, I have to say that it might be the longevity of this one. It just goes on a bit too long and it's hard for me to sit down from start to finish with this one, yet individually I enjoy all of its tracks. Coming in at number 9 we have Brendaman Stigar by the band Cultivator from 1981. So honestly, quite to my own shame, originally when I reviewed this album I gave it a rating of 8, and I couldn't have felt worse about it right now. Yes, this Swedish band called Cultivator has surprised us all with only a singular album at the start of the 80s, and honestly, for what it's worth, this album is just really good. It's really solid, and when looking at this, the entire discography of Cultivator, I can definitely say that they have a pretty perfect discography. Now, this album does fit quite snugly to the eclectic prog / folk prog category, but I do believe that it also has a lot to do with Zool, or at least the ethics of how Zool is made. Thus, I do believe that people from both sides of this camp would like this album quite a bit. But yeah, all in all, this album is definitely quite similar to bands like Comus. It is folky, it is bewitched, it is very much out there and otherworldly in a sense, and it does feel like it's coursing through your veins as you're listening to it. Now, when it comes down to it, Sweden has given our world some of the greatest prog bands ever, some of them being the Flower Kings, Moon Safari, Opeth, Beardfish, but honestly, in the presence of all of them, I do believe that we should at least acknowledge Cultivator as this one-off band with a really solid album that more people should definitely know. Coming in at number 8 we have Red Queen to Gryphon 3 by Gryphon from 1974. So just to get all of you caught up on things, this is the first album on this ranking that actually originally received the rating of 10 out of 10. Yes, Red Queen to Gryphon 3 is a really perfect album, though I must say that if I had to rank it today, I'd lower it to a pretty high 9, and that is mostly because I don't find myself coming back to this album as much as I would like to at least, and the track Lament itself has kind of turned into one that I might skip sometimes, and you know that an album isn't entirely perfect if you have tracks that you feel like skipping on. But with that being said, don't get me wrong, this one is well deserving of the 8th spot. Yes, this amazing album is just unlike anything that I've ever known. Gryphon have definitely taken an interesting approach to the entire folk/medieval prog idea, with their debut album that I reviewed on episode 2 being basically just medieval music and not that much more beyond that. But in this third installment in their discography, they have somehow managed to find what is probably the most homogeneous and perfect combination of progressive rock and the progressive traits and traditional medieval and folk music together. Yes, in the 38 minutes that this album runs for, it has managed to captivate something that I just literally cannot explain with words, and apparently Gryphon themselves were also not able to explain this with words, thus they've made this an entirely instrumental album, and by golly, am I happy that they did so, because their music is most appreciated when it's just purely instrumental, and that's just simply a fact. And yes, it is no wonder that this album is considered to be a classic, because when it comes down to it, progressive folk has developed quite a bit, but I do believe that one of the main quintessential albums that have been built upon in later years has to be this one, alongside albums like Aqualung or Thick as a Brick, and on the other side of the spectrum, maybe Comus. Coming in at number 7, we have Hooked by the band Agusa from 2014. So yes, surprise, surprise, yet another Swedish band on this ranking, and trust me when I tell you that they are not to be the last. And today we're taking a look at this one, which specifically is Agusa and their pretty recent album Hooked. So this band actually formed only a year before releasing this debut album of theirs, and for all intents and purposes, this one is just a perfect album. I must admit that I don't come back to this one as often as I'd like, although right after hearing this one I replayed it a bunch of times, and I still do think that it's mainly just a perfect album. Despite the fact that I do have some issues with it, I do believe that I've managed to kind of overlook them or just accept them as the part of the aesthetic of this album and really find its perfection after some trial and error. Now this album is retro prog at its finest. I don't think that it's actually symphonic prog or eclectic prog, but it does definitely have a lot to do with the space and the psych, but still it sounds like something that you'd hear in the past, dominated by organs of all various kinds. This one just kind of takes you on a journey. A little amount of vocals is used on here, at least tangibly. Most of them are just used mainly as instruments, except for the last track, which is something that at first I didn't really entirely like, but now I do think that I like this one. And overall, the experience of this one, despite being overstretched and long at times, is just so captivating, so immersive, so transcending at times, and honestly I just really enjoy that. And the nice thing about this one, in comparison to a lot of other psych prog or psych rock albums that I know, is that this one feels like it has the meat and potatoes, while most other albums feel like they're just, potatoes, no real meat, nothing to really latch on to, nothing to expect in the album. It's just really long, stretched out pieces of nothingness, when this album is definitely just not that. Every single song out of the 4 tracks on this album has that moment when everything just comes crashing down in a very intense way. It doesn't have to be a very defined way, but it just has to be felt, and when it's felt, you're getting the gratification of listening to this album. And as I speak and I elaborate and I speak about this album more and more, I tend to think to myself that my words really can't convey what this album sounds like, and thus, again, as I'd say about any other album on this list, you might as well just go ahead and check it out. Coming in at number 6, we have Birds of Fire by Mahavishnu Orchestra from 1973. So bear with me, because I do believe that this one is a bit of an odd pick. I originally gave this album a rating of 9, and as for now I'm gonna keep it as a 9. So how then did this one manage to top other albums which are clear 10s out of 10s? And well, the reasoning for it is that I do believe that this album will even further grow on me in the future, becoming one of my favorite prog albums, or at least favorite jazz fusion albums of all time. Now, at least in my humble opinion, I do believe that Birds of Fire is the pinnacle of jazz fusion. Now, the whole idea of jazz fusion is fusioning the traditional ideas of jazz with rock music, putting them together in something that hopefully might be homogeneous, although more often than not it feels like they either are just simply unbalanced on an album or really not that homogeneous, more like heterogeneous. And the fact of the matter is, Birds of Fire is the best album to ever group the two together in one place and making them sound natural together. And well, it's such an amazing thing. And again, this is just irreplicable, and that actually also makes me think of Mahavishnu Orchestra as the best jazz fusion band ever. And the thing is, this album can really get overwhelming at times, but the fact of the matter is, it also leaves a lot of leeway for the viewer, or the listener that is, to just, mock about inside of it, enjoy it for what it is, not be too stressed about it. The music itself is very demanding in all forms, with instrumentation and the time signatures and the compositions themselves, yet it feels like this album doesn't try that hard to impress, but rather it just does what these guys know how to do naturally, and that's to be freaking badasses. Honestly, this album is made mainly of perfect tracks. It does have some of those transitional tracks which are kind of more experimental in nature, but I don't really mind them that much, seeing as they do add for the entire experience of this album. But if I had to say something, and it might be quite controversial, I think that a track like One Word takes the entirety of Miles Davis' Bitches Brew in a landslide. Yes, I said it. Coming in at number 5, we have Hope by the band Klaatu from 1977. So I must admit, this pick was also quite a surprise to me. I didn't really expect to be putting Klaatu on the number 5th spot, but apparently that's just what I just did. Yes, this is a band that I first heard about quite a while ago, and I knew that they were this sort of band that were once thought to be the Beatles in disguise. They've reformed, and I knew that their first album was basically just exemplary of that. But in any case, I did not know anything about their sophomore album, and when I put it on the list, I really did not know what to expect, and by God, this one took me away in a storm. Honestly, one of the things that I do appreciate about this album is the fact that they have managed to find their own voice here. It was clear to everyone when this album dropped that they were not actually the Beatles, they were some other guys just sounding sometimes like the Beatles. And when it comes to what they actually sound like, they have my personal favorite mix of progressive rock. It is symphonic prog with a lot of joyous orchestral interjections inside, and honestly I couldn't have asked for anything better. And the thing is, while this album does have its repeating motifs, it doesn't ever seem to fall into one strict category, but instead it tries various different things with moods, ideas, sounds and whatnot, and it succeeds with all of them. And despite this being a very eclectic and all over the place listen, I do believe that as a whole, Hope feels like a very cohesive album. Honestly, there are so many great tracks in the album. The opening and the closing tracks do actually quite sound like Beatles tunes, but alongside that we have some interesting ones like the more narrative Long Live Polytania, or The Loneliest Creature in the World, which just has lovely vocals, or a Madman with its odd post-punk rock guitar solos, whatnot, and they're all so freaking good. And this is again an album of a once in a lifetime, and I definitely urge anyone to go ahead and check it out. Coming in at number 4, we have Illusions on a Double Dimple by the band Triumvirat from 1973. So this album only has 2 songs on it, specifically 2 whole-sided suites, and in this case that it might as well be a great album or it might be just an awful one. But personally, this one has managed to captivate me in the most sincere manner, and I believe that it's beyond good than what I can describe with words. Yes, I already have complimented this German band quite enough by this point when I reviewed Spartacus just not too long ago, and then when I talked about Mr. 10% in my top 10 favorite songs list, but again I'll have to talk about this album as a whole and why I think that it works so well and why it's a perfect 10 in my opinion. So as you might know me already, I have a really big soft spot for the longer tracks, and you'll see this coming on later on this list. It's just a thing that I really like, and well, this album has two of them and they're both really good. When it comes to their narratives, I'm not entirely sure what they speak about. I know that they talk about like chapters in a person's life or something like that, but they're pretty all over the place. They're whimsical at times, they're very outrageous, and I like that. I like that quite a bit, and of course everything is led by the amazing, brilliant Jürgen Fritz, which to me at least matches Keith Emerson on his abilities and compositional styles very much equally so, and it's so nice to listen to this album because of him. And overall, if I had to estimate this album as a whole, I'd say that the first side is perfect, but the second side is just way more perfect than it. I don't really know how to say that. This album is entirely perfect, but the amount of times that I come back to Mr. 10% as opposed to the title track is just disproportional. I think that the second side of this album is one of the best prog pieces that I've ever heard, and honestly, I don't know how to really describe it with words, but if you want to hear more about it, I did talk about this song in particular just a few days ago when I did my top 10 favorite songs. So coming in at number 3, we have May by the band Eekline from 2002. So if you thought that 2 songs on an entire album was not a lot, wait until you hear that this album only consists of one singular track on it. And well, this one to me is just a perfect album from start to finish, despite the fact that it only has one song on it. And yes, I might have included this one in one of my top 10 favorite songs, but honestly, when it comes down to it, I don't think that it really deserves its spot there. But yeah, nevertheless, May by Eekline is anything and everything that I could have asked for ever. It's just a 50-minute long, one singular song that is great from start to finish and always gets me up and feeling emotions, experiencing joy, wanting to move, wanting to cry, wanting to be there, wanting to listen to it without hesitation from start to finish because it's so well written. Now, this Eekline album / song has come about from the original ideal conceptual, something that has to do with maybe inferno, hell, human spirits, whatnot, the existential relationship of humans on Earth. I really don't know, but what I do know is that it's just a really solid piece of music. Now, unfortunately, really unfortunately, this album just happened to be a bit too long to be fitting snugly on a vinyl, but oh my god, I don't know what to say about this one, because on the one hand, I would have loved to own a vinyl copy of this one, but on the other hand, it would have meant to reduce some of its parts, and well, I think that there's literally nothing that you can take away from this song and leaving it sounding as good as it is right now. And yes, as I have already mentioned, I do have a huge soft spot for these longer pieces. And when it comes down to it, I've listened to this one from start to finish so many times in one singular sitting that it's honestly just unhealthy, and the amount of times that I procrastinated listening to new albums for the series in sake of just listening to this one more time is immaculate, and yeah, that's how good I think this album is. Now specifically, I know that there's a lot of people who are not big fans of these longer stretches of music, and I get it, I honestly do get it, but I would still recommend this album that you at least give it a try, because it is very much brilliant. It is very much just an exemplary album of what long pieces of prog can really be and what they're worth, and when it comes down to it, May by Eekline is a once-in-a-lifetime creation that everyone should at least get to know once. So coming in at number 2, we have Si on avait besoin du 5e saison by the band Harmonium from 1975. So how do I even begin to explain to you why this album is so good? I guess that the only way I can really get it through is just with you listening to the album, and if you're one of those people that have never heard this album, I don't know what you're doing here, honestly, just go, please listen to it, don't watch this video, it's really not worth your time. But yes, this album is just literally unmatched. There will probably never be yet another album, especially not a prog album, that will match this one in its aesthetic, in its essence, in the way that it approaches music, in its ethics, in its result, in its composition, in its writing, in its whatnot. This album is literally a one-of-a-kind piece. And this album, commonly known as the Fifth Season, or What If We Had a Fifth Season, is the sophomore album by the French-Canadian band Harmonium. And when it comes down to it, it does sound like a really solid progressive rock album, but at the same time, it seems like they've gotten in tune with some other channel of reality that has not been explored up until that point, and maybe it has ever since, but not in the same capacity. This album to me is just one of those odd breeds of progressive rock. It is notably progressive, it is notably rockish, but at the same time, it just is nothing like Close to the Edge, like Yes, like King Crimson, like Pink Floyd, like Genesis, like that. It's so out of the blue. If I had to try and describe what's so special about this one, I'd have to say that it's very introspective, it's very natural, it's very unpompous, it's not pretentious, and it's so good for it. From start to finish, this album only has 5 tracks on it, with the 4 first tracks just representing the 4 seasons and the 5th one supposedly representing this unknown 5th season. And when it comes down to it, they all take a pretty different approach to how they represent the individual season, the weather, the mood of it, and they all do an excellent job, specifically with the second and the last tracks being literally irreplicable pieces of music. Yes, originally when making the review of this album, I was debating whether I should give this one a rating of 9 or a 10. I just didn't really know what I was dealing with. What was this album? I did not understand it yet. I knew that I loved it so much, and I didn't let my worries get the best of me, and honestly I'm so happy that I did so and gave this one a rating of 10 because it deserves it so freaking much. But when it comes down to it, there is still one album that took this one, and actually it took it by a landslide, and that is of course my number 1 pick. So coming in at number 1, we have Sleeping in Traffic Part 2 by the band Beardfish from 2008. So as I said, this album is way better than the last one, and that is not to say that the 5th season is not a good album, but this one just... it's better than anything that I've probably ever heard, and you know that it's such a good album when it literally managed to shake my belief and poke holes in the fact that my favorite prog album might not still be Atom Heart Mother, the album that introduced me to the genre, the album that encapsulates everything that I like about prog is now being, trifled with by this new album that has entered my life this year. Yes, this monumental effect that this album had on my life can only be attributed to one singular album, and that is Sleeping in Traffic Part 2 by Beardfish. When it comes to retro prog, which is a subgenre of progressive rock that I've discovered that I so dearly love this year, I have found that this is the best example for it ever. This album does not only strive to make do with what the past sounded like and what the greats have taught us, but instead also learn from many other things, incorporating other musical genres inside and making something which is totally unheard of. This album from start to finish consists of only 8 tracks, with the first and last one being the sort of introduction and outro to the entire album, which I particularly really enjoy because they always get me in the mood and kind of get my blood pumping for what's to come. But when it comes down to it, the 6 tracks to be found in the middle of this album are all masterpieces, one after the other. I can come back to each and every one of them, unhesitantly loving them each and every time, no matter how many times I've given them a listen. From the starting duo of Into the Night and The Hunter, which are just so freaking perfect. Again, no way to exemplify this, you have to listen to this album for yourself, but yes, they are perfect. And right from there, coming into South of the Border, probably the funniest progressive rock song I've ever heard, and also uncompromising when it comes to its compositions, skills, abilities, music and whatnot. Later followed up by Cash Flow, again such an odd, almost psychedelic track that is then concluded with the Downward Spiral / Chimay. A very memorable song, very catchy, very funny, and very progressive in nature, and all of that before it comes to a conclusion, the title track, the big 37-minute long epic that concludes not only one but two installments of this Sleeping in Traffic albums, and this is of course Sleeping in Traffic, the humongous song, which at first kind of made me doubtful on whether I'm actually gonna be giving this album a 10 out of 10, just because I didn't know within myself could I actually enjoy on multiple occasions a 37-minute long song, only to then discover that yes, I will enjoy it every single time over and over again. I've listened to that one dozens of times and to the album probably hundreds of times by now, and it is a perfect album, uncontested, and as I said, might actually be my favorite progressive rock album of all time. And you know, with that, I am happy because it means that the series that I've done this year has shown some great fruits of success, and I have managed to find something which is so good, and I am just so thankful that I've not gone through this entire year without getting to know this album in particular. And yes, I've talked to several people this year who have never listened to this album, and I think that that's a really bad thing. Like, honestly, if you don't know Sleeping in Traffic Part 2, you should get on it. You know, you should get on it right now. You should clear like an hour and 15 minutes of your life and just sit down, listen to this one. It is filled with only good music on it, and you know, superb music with that being, and yeah, it's just an experience that you must experience in your lifetime at least once, but I might actually suggest that you'll probably come back to it more than that. And for me, this is the best progressive rock album that I know of, at least when it comes to the objective and subjective balance of the two. But yeah, with that being said, I am over, and I'm gonna be going a bit off script right now, so you know, don't mind what I'm saying that much, but I'm gonna try and explain to you what's gonna happen now. Firstly, I'm taking a break, okay? I have made these videos for an entire year on a daily basis, and I am tired, and I am in college and there's tests all around, and yeah, I'm really tired. I think I'm gonna take around about like a month's break, and I will share with you yet another thing. I am looking forward to doing a surgery in February, so that will be even more daunting on me, so yeah, a lot of things happening. I just need a break. But the one thing that I do know is that I really want to come back and, you know, make exciting content for you guys. Now, when it comes to the conclusion of the series itself, I have not really still done my part. I still want to make a very conclusive video for this entire series that I've done this year. And the way that I'm going to do that is that I'm going to be starting to work on this humongous project of trying to encapsulate all 365 Days of Prog in one video. I'm gonna start to do that probably right now, and I'm gonna hopefully release that video in about a month's time. But again, I'm not gonna stress too much over it because I just want to, you know, lay my head back, just relax a bit. I have done my part. And with that being said, I will see you in a while. Stay tuned because I'm gonna have a lot more exciting content, and I will be posting some random stuff on my community tab. So yeah, that is about it. If you have enjoyed the 365 Days of Prog, you might as well want to go ahead and check out my Patreon, or you might want to go ahead and buy me a coffee or a mushroom. You can see all of that in my about page. But yeah, of course, thank you to my regular patrons, being Clay Wallum, Rist of Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are definitely the best. And with that being said, I'll see you all in a while. Bye guys.